Good evening, everyone. Happy Tuesday, August the 24th. I am Melissa St. Clair, and I am standing in for Susie L. McMahon tonight, who is a bit under the weather, and we are sending her well wishes and, speeding back to us soon. So for the virtual book club, tonight, our guest is Greer MacAllister. Hey, Greer.
Hello,
Thank you so much
hello.
for being here. I'll give a few minutes to let people come on since it is just 7 o'clock. We'll let people click in and join us. Susie L. McMahon Virtual Book Club, you are in the right place. Susie is a bit under the weather. Melissa St. Clair here standing in for her. And I am very honored to have that duty for tonight. So. Again, good evening. We're about a minute in to Susie L. McMahon Virtual Book Club for Tuesday, August 24th, featuring Greer MacAllister. And we are going to be talking about her fabulous book, The Arctic Fury. I know I blew through it in a week because I couldn't put it down. I'll give like maybe one more minute and then I will jump into Greer's bio. And then we'll have Greer do a little backstory and overview of the Arctic Fury. Good evening once again. This is Susie L. McMahon's Virtual Book Club. Susie is a bit under the weather, so Melissa St. Clair standing in on duty tonight. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. It is my pleasure to formally, officially introduce Greer MacAllister. She was raised in the Midwest, earning her MFA in creative writing from American University. Her debut novel, The Magician's Lie, was a USA Today bestseller, an Indie Next Pick, and Target Book Club selection. Her novels Girl in Disguise and Woman 99 were inspired by pioneering 19th century private detective Kate Warney and fearless journalist Nellie Bly, respectively. And the book that we all want to know about, her new book, The Arctic Fury, was named an Indie Next and Library Reads Pick and Amazon Best Book of the Month, and spotlighted new release at Pop Sugar, Libro.fm, and Goodreads. That's huge, y'all. A regular contributor to Writer Unboxed and Chicago Review of Books, she lives with her family in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, the heartbeat of USA. So, Greer, welcome.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction, and thank you all for hosting me here tonight.
It is our pleasure, and I am going to be watching the chat. So ahead of Greer's background about the book and overview, feel free to drop questions in, and we will get to them later in the Q&A session. So Greer, I'm going to let you take it away and talk about the book, The Arctic Fury.
Well, I'm always happy to sort of tell the story of where things came from, and I know different historical novelists. We all write historical fiction, but in some cases it's more history, in some cases it's more fiction. So in my case, I usually tend more toward the fiction side. I like to use history as kind of a jumping off point to tell the stories of some women who existed in these times, but some, women who might have existed in these times, or what if women had done certain things in certain times. So all of my books sort of seem to have settled into a natural boundary between the 1850s and the 1910s, all in America. So all about American history and interesting, women in extraordinary circumstances is one of the ways that I like to put it. So the Arctic Fury, and I keep having to make sure that I'm pointing in the right direction here. The Arctic Fury is a what if story. So the real kernel of truth that inspired it is the Franklin expedition. So there were Britain was sending just tons and tons of men looking for the Northwest Passage through Canada. in the 1840s, and one very famous expedition, John Franklin's expedition, 2 ships, over 100 men, sailed off in the 1840s and was never heard from again. And what made it interesting and sort of set it apart was what his wife did, and really put herself out there and was personally funding expeditions to go look for him, was urging the Royal Navy to go look for him, was traveling around getting people to pay in subscriptions to fund expeditions to look for him. And these expeditions just kept coming back empty-handed. Couldn't find him, couldn't find a trace of him, because that part of the world was not well mapped, and they knew sort of where he had gone, but not exactly. And it's such an inhospitable part of the world. It's not like, sailing up and down the coast of California where you can just sort of pop in at every little bay. So Lady Jane Franklin kept sending expeditions to look for him. They kept coming up empty-handed. And my book is about, well, what if she had gotten so sick of all these men not being able to find her husband's expedition that she sent a group of women instead? So this is a group of 13 women, some of whom are ideally suited for Arctic travel and some of whom are not. They sail, head north from Boston into the wilds of the Arctic looking for John Franklin and his men. And part of the book follows that. And then the other half of the book, as you know, if you've read it, follows the murder trial of what happens when not all of those women come back. So it really was inspired by this kernel of real history. But what I really enjoyed doing as I was putting it together was finding all of these real women and types of women from the 1840s and 1850s. There really were rich women who were climbing mountains. There were women who were battlefield nurses during war. There were women who were married to trappers in Canada. There were women who, lots and lots of women who traveled with their families, left their lives on the East Coast and Midwest behind to cross the continent and go to follow the Oregon Trail and follow the California Trail to try to make a new life for their families in what was also a fairly inhospitable territory. So putting together my female supergroup of the 1840s and 1850s ladies was one of my favorite parts of writing the book.
Yeah, and I love that these stories are being told or reimagined, and just how powerful and what strides women actually were making in different time periods that we would not expect. So.
Yeah, I think the sense, people feel they sort of have this vibe and this feeling from the 1840s and 1850s, for example, of, a woman's place is in the home. They're very nurturing and just taking care of the kids, not allowed to work outside the home, all of that. And that was true of the majority of women, for sure. But the majority isn't everybody. And there were women doing much more fringe things and not just, tending the home fires during that time.
Exciting. So we do have some questions that came in ahead of time. And if you're just joining us, you are in the right place. This is the Susie L. McMahon Virtual Book Club. Susie is a bit under the weather this evening, so I am standing in for her, and I'm happy to do so. So I am going to go down the list of questions that came in ahead. You already answered the one, discovering the history of the Franklin expedition. So the second part of that question submitted was, what intrigued you the most?
One of the things that really stood out to me, the way that I found out about the Franklin expedition was actually from a Margaret Atwood short story that I read in graduate school, which was many, many years ago now. But it's really stuck with me the whole time that they had to take all of their food with them. So the Arctic, you can hunt in the Arctic, and you read that in the Arctic Fury, the women finding some food, but overall you really couldn't plan on that. And so the British would take 3 years of food with them. And so they had all of these canned goods on the ships. And they had, as so many people do, the government had given the contract to the lowest bidder. And what turned out to be the case when they searched later on is they found out that all of the tinned food that had gone with the Franklin expedition was improperly sealed and leaking lead into the food. So on top of being marooned in a strange place, inhospitable, and being in the direst straits possible, they were also getting lead poisoning from eating their food. So just that really stuck with me as just a chilling detail of people not sort of thinking ahead in the consequences of certain actions.
Wow, that's terrible. Oh, golly. So many things that you could talk about right there. But second question is, what gives you the most enjoyment as a writer?
Talking to readers is a really big part of it. I mean, the process of writing itself, some days I enjoy it and some days I really don't enjoy it. Some days are harder than others. So I'm one of those writers who really enjoys having written and having it done and looking at it on the page. Although I write very messy drafts. So even when it's on the page, that doesn't mean that it's done. It just means that that's the start of the process. But I got to go in person for the first time in a very long time and meet hundreds of readers in Minnesota last week. And that just, it's so exciting. I sat down at a table. It was a big luncheon and I sat down at a table and the person across the table said, "Oh, I love The Magician's Lie." And the person next to me said, "Oh, I love Girl in Disguise." And the person across from me said, "Oh, I just finished reading Woman 99." And I still on some level don't understand how people have heard of my books without me personally telling them, even though I know that's how books work. And I have a publisher and there are libraries and bookstores and everything else. Everybody, there are ways to have my books travel much further in the world than I can travel. But to sit down and talk to readers and just get that opportunity to connect with them is really probably my favorite part.
That's so great. And I think you alluded to what your process is. Are you a pencil or pen to paper person, or are you a word processing person when you're writing, or maybe a combo?
I'm a computer person. I do all of my first draft and a lot of my stuff on the page because it goes a lot faster that way. And I'm constantly rewriting as I write. But there's always a point in the process where I have the draft and I have to print it out and I have to go through and mark it up by hand because there's a part in the editing process. And after I've sort of gotten to a certain point and I can't edit it on screen in the big picture. And there's some books like The Magician's Lie, which has sort of these alternating points of view. And I had to print it out and put a stack of the present timeline and a stack of the past timeline to figure it out. And then I even put them back in different order. So there's stuff that I can only do on paper with pen.
Oh my goodness. And don't use any fans in your office, right? To blow any of those papers around. Okay, so next question is, what character or characters do you feel most connected to in the Arctic Fury?
It's a really good question. I've been asked several times, like, which of the women would I be? And the answer is that I would not have gone on this trip. Nobody would have invited me. And if they had invited me, I wouldn't have gone because it was a bad idea. But I feel like I have this connection with Doro for some reason. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe because she's quiet and I'm, events like this notwithstanding, I am in my life a fairly quiet person. So there's that. And then there's something about Caprice that I really enjoyed writing. And she's not necessarily a nice person and not necessarily a good person. And she does what she has to when the chips are down. But there's just something about writing a person who says whatever comes into their head that's really fun.
That's awesome. Okay, so next question is, are you a member of a book club or a writing club?
I am a member of a book club, and I have a new neighbor who just moved in who said, "Oh, I think we should start a book club because she wants a book club that's not just about wine and that really like people who mark up the books and really get into it." So I'm about to join that book club. And I was in a writing group in New York when I lived there and loved it. We met every single week. We had 6 people who wrote all of these different genres, nautical fiction and supernatural and sci-fi and everything. And it was really good to get different opinions on my work while I was in process. But the point that I'm at now, and I moved and lost that group and I haven't really found a new one that does the same thing. But at this point, I have sort of beta readers. I have friends who, once I have a complete draft of the book, I can hand it over to them and they can look at the whole thing at once because you can get a very different kind of feedback from looking at the whole draft at once as you do from 20 pages at a time. Because you can write a fabulous 20 pages and then another fabulous 20 pages and then another fabulous 20 pages and still have a terrible book. So you need the big picture read. I think that's from my experience anyway.
Right. And people that will be providing honest feedback, that constructive criticism, right?
That means a lot. It
Yes.
really does.
Okay. Another question is, what is your favorite childhood book?
I think you can see up here, these are all Madeleine L'Engle books. So A Wrinkle in Time, A Wind in the Door, A Swiftly Tilting Planet, all of the Austen series. Like Madeleine L'Engle was definitely my favorite when I was a kid. So those are the books that have come with me everywhere I go. I've also got the Narnia. These white ones up here are all the Narnia books.
That's so great. Oh my goodness. And we are nearing time for Greer to introduce our special guest, our surprise guest. And you are in the right place. This is the Susie L. McMahon Virtual Book Club. Susie is a bit under the weather, so Melissa St. Clair standing in. And we are hoping that Denny's connection is good. Greer, I am actually going to turn it over to you to introduce the next person.
Our special surprise guest,
Yes.
whose book you will be reading in the future. She has she's many things with and does many things in her life. She is a reviewer for NPR and has written lots of reviews of books, especially romance books. Her debut came out just at the beginning of this year. And she's actually somebody who, we've done virtual events together. She actually interviewed me for my book launch for the Arctic Fury. For the Arctic Fury last fall. Her book is fantastic. It is full of music and dance and memory and has the word wild in it. So if it has the word wild in it, it's going to get a little crazy, and has the word blues in it. So that gives you a little bit more of a sense of what to expect. But it's a dual timeline book going back and forth between a character in the present who has some challenges that he's trying to work through, and the memories of a woman from the past and the extremely interesting life that she lived in those years. So I don't know if that's enough hinting. I think it is. And here we have Lenny. You are in a log cabin.
So far, so good. I am totally in a log cabin. When I say log cabin, I mean log cabin. So as I said, my internet connection is going and coming. So thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Did you get to hear my introduction?
Sorry,
I said wild and I said blues, but I didn't say the whole name of the book. But I'm sure some will have guessed.
Here is the whole book.
Oh,
yes,
terrific.
It's called Wild Women and the Blues.
Okay.
And came out March 30th of this year, my debut novel. It looks good in a log cabin, don't you think? And it's, should I talk a little bit about it?
Absolutely.
I have a puppy here too. He went back. It is historical fiction, has a dual timeline set in 1925 and in 2015. The 1925 storyline is about a ambitious chorus girl who wants to move on up from a small speakeasy to the big time and State Street and the Stroll in Chicago. And that is the heart of the story. It takes place in Chicago. And in 2015, it is about a grieving young film student who happens to wander through his grandmother's attic, finds some photos. He's working on a film project. He finds a reel of film. Next thing you know, he's talking to a 110-year-old woman in Chicago who happens to have been around in 1925. And coincidentally, the woman in 2015, her name is Honorée Dalcour, and the woman in 1925 is Honorée Dalcour. So these two stories come together in interesting ways, as we like to say in the dual storyline business.
Love it. Love it.
So that's all I got. I'm very excited that your book club is going to be reading it. It's very, I'm Thank you. Thank you for adding it to the list.
Yes, we
And,
are excited. That we'll be featuring it in the spring of 2022. So we are excited to have you in the
fantastic.
lineup.
Yes. Well, since I'm here, I might as well dive in. I was listening to Greer talk about readers and how fun it is to be in front of readers and get their feedback. I'm finding that to be very exciting as well. What has been one of the most impactful or profound reader moments that come to mind in association with the Arctic Fury?
Ooh, I love that
First thing that comes to
question.
your
I love that question. I'm going to cheat a little bit because my most
Okay.
memorable, like the reader moment that stands out for me in the biggest way is from the tour that I did for The Magician's Lie, my first book. And the Arctic
Okay.
Fury last week was really the first time that I've gotten out to promote it in person because so much of it has been pandemic. And the silver lining of the pandemic is that I've met a whole lot of people doing this, doing the virtual thing. But for The Magician's Lie, I had a much more traditional book tour, sort of hopping around. And there were, places that I recommended. There were places that my publisher said, oh, why don't you go here? Why don't you go to Dayton, Ohio? I'm like, okay, sure. I'll go to Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
So I was in Dayton, Ohio at a bookstore. And a young woman came up and said, I didn't know I was coming to your book event. My boyfriend told me to just get in the car and that he was taking me somewhere that I was really going to like. And we drove 3 hours. So they had no idea. She had no idea where she was going. But The Magician's Lie was her favorite book. And so as a surprise for her, he brought her to a completely different city, brought her to meet me and get her book signed. And then they went out to dinner afterward and drove home. So I'm tearing up even thinking about it. It was a really wonderful, wonderful experience. So that one really, really stands out to me.
Oh my goodness, that is such a heartwarming story in itself. Wow. So, Greer, do you have a question for Denny?
So many. Let's start with one. So and I think I'll keep talking, even though just in case I'm hoping, because I think
I can hear you.
You can hear. Awesome.
Okay.
Yes. Your picture is going a little in and out, but your voice is very consistent. So I'm gonna hope that you can hear and we get to listen.
Okay.
Wild Women in the Blues, I just love the feeling of it. I love so much about it. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of where it came from initially, that first spark of inspiration that set you off?
Well, I always have to mention two sparks of inspiration when I talk about the origin, if you will, for the story idea. I always like to say that my maternal grandmother had a lot to do with it. She came to this country from Kingston, Jamaica, in 1923. And when I was a little girl, she had all these photos. She was a photo person and they were all over the walls. And she was all dressed up in front of these funny looking cars. And I'd ask her questions. And she'd tell me stories about when she first came to America. So that was sort of like, in the back of your brain. And then the other thing the other person is a woman by the name of Alberta Hunter. Alberta Hunter was a famous blues singer in the 20s and the 30s. I happened to have met her when she was in her 80s and making a comeback. She was singing at a club called The Cookery in New York City. And at the time, I was a professional dancer and on tables in New York.
Oh, I think we're having a little bit of a delay. Hopefully Denny can
before her performances. Okay. And we talk about Chicago and the old days. Now, this is long before I had any thought of writing, because I was all about dancing at the time. So those two women just sort of came back to me as I started.
We're hanging in there, the Susie L. McMahon Virtual Book Club with all of our virtual, there she is, yay.
Now I can't hear you, but that's okay.
Okay.
Two women coming together. That's where we left off.
Did you hear any of my remarks? My answers?
Yes. The two women, we got to the two women, and I guess those sort of your grandmother and then Alberta sort of paved the way.
Yes. They were just people who I had a chance to meet, had a chance to interact with, and that was sort of like the nuggets that led to the book.
Wonderful.
Am I back?
Awesome. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I'm
And
waving.
if you're just joining us, this is the Susie L. McMahon Virtual Book Club. This is Melissa St. Clair standing in for her tonight. Susie is a bit under the weather. As we progress with the meeting, I do want to give a shout out on behalf of Susie to Brenda Gardner. She runs the Friends and Fiction Book Club that has had wild success online on Facebook. And she will be at Susie's spring Low Country getaway. So that'll be in March of 2022. So we're excited to have her on with us tonight. And if you have more questions, please drop them in the comments. Oh, let's see. Okay. I do see a new question. Absolutely, Shoshana. Thank you. Okay. It says, given that Virginia, this is for Greer, given that Virginia and Caprice's relationship was almost always contentious and Caprice seemed a diva-ish, okay, even though she was adventurous and could work hard, how did you come to make her the hero?
That's a good question. Virginia and Caprice, I feel like, yes, they're very contentious throughout. Virginia is in charge. Caprice feels like she should be in charge. And I really thought of Caprice as a foil to Virginia. Like there's going to be somebody there who's challenging her authority. And that's the person who's going to end up dead. And, obviously I played with lots of different ideas. I'm like, well, what if she ends up to not really be dead, but she's dead. She's 100% dead. But I don't like to make people completely heroes or completely villains. And I felt like having her be antagonistic and having her be the foil and having her really just spend a lot of time being mean to other people, but to have that sort of core kernel of goodness in her was more interesting and more complex. That really people go to great lengths to keep the secret of what happened to her and what happened to some of the other women. Because I feel like if it were just, it's Virginia and Caprice is always in the wrong, then that's not as interesting as, well, Caprice has a point, and Virginia is not entirely prepared for this. So I wanted to introduce some of that complexity. And I did want Caprice to have sort of a heroic death. And the interesting thing was actually Anne's death. In my first draft, I actually was able to keep a lot of what I wrote in the first draft of this particular book, which is not always the case with my books. But there was only one character I had to kill twice because I had written a death scene for Anne where she and the dogs fell through the ice. And then once I figured out what happened to Caprice, and Caprice fell into a crevasse in the ice, I'm like, well, I can't have two people fall through the ice. So that's when Anne got her different ending, because I really felt just that image of
Smell really good.
her being down there and reaching up and the red coat and all that just stood out in my mind so beautifully. I'm like, okay, that's going to stay, and then this other stuff can change.
Great. Shoshana, thanks for that question. And we have a new question for Denny. As a debut novelist, what has surprised you about the process? Oh, hopefully she can hear us. Oh, maybe. Denny, I'll ask again. Oh, as a debut novelist, what has surprised you about the process? Uh-oh, maybe her audio is off.
It's a healthy dose. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, she dropped again.
Oh, golly. Okay.
Shoot.
Y'all, she is at a writing retreat. So She is off-site, and internet is not as strong as probably it normally would be. So if she comes back on, or we'll encourage her to come back in and maybe answer that question in the comments. So I do have another question I was going to ask both of you. So Greer, I will ask you first, and maybe Denny will come back on. What book or books are on your nightstand right now?
My nightstand right now is kind of my phone. I'm reading a lot of stuff on my phone. I do have some advanced copies of things that I'm reading from some of my friends. So Juliette Fay, her new book is coming out. Her last couple of books have been historical fiction, but she has a new one coming out that's contemporary called Catch Us When We Fall. And it's about a young woman who's an alcoholic, and her boyfriend has died. Then she finds out that she's pregnant, and she goes to the only person that she can think of who might be able to help her, who is her boyfriend's brother, who is the third baseman.
Hi, I have no idea if you can hear me or not.
We can hear you.
Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Biggest challenge was
Yes.
the release dates in a 12-month period because of the pandemic.
Oh, I think Denny is answering maybe the question.
Oh, you can hear me.
Oh,
so
yes,
I'm
yes,
just
we
going
can hear
to
you.
talk.
Okay, yes.
You can mute me when you're tired of kind of listening to me. The question about my the debut, there was a couple of challenges, like releasing during the pandemic. I had 3 different release dates over a 12-month period because, the publishing industry was trying to adjust to this trying to figure it out. And how do you release books during this time period? I feel that they really got a handle on it because the virtual opportunities, as well as some other things that they started to do, I think will continue to be a part of the strategies, if you will, for marketing books, because some of these things that have happened have been quite beneficial for authors, I think, especially, we're able to interact with many more readers on a national scale that we wouldn't be able to visit with in-store events only. So I'm hoping to see a great combination of both.
Yes, the silver lining of COVID-19.
Can you still hear me?
Oh, yes, yes.
Oh, thank you.
So
you can ask me questions in the private chat or in the chat, and I can answer since I can be heard. I can't hear you all. Sorry.
Okay, I'm going to type really fast. So answering a question on what is she currently. Greer, were you finished with your what's on your nightstand?
Oh yeah, I think that was sort of the end of that particular.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask Denny on the back side, and we'll get her to answer this one. Denny, what books? Okay, so I just asked Denny behind the scenes what book is on her nightstand.
Oh, I keep forgetting that you guys can hear me, so I start typing instead of talking. One of the books that I have a lot of books on the newsstand, but one of the books I'm very excited about is The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, and that is by Honorée Jeffers, who is a poet. I think the book was picked by Oprah, announced today as being her book of the month. I'm also excited. I'm reading Harlem. Yeah, I'm reading Harlem Shuffle by Colston Whitehead, and a lot of these books aren't out yet. I have a tendency to do that. Just finished a fabulous, well, so many books. One that I'm really enjoying now is by Beatrice Williams, called The Woman in Moscow. I'm really enjoying that and looking forward to Fiona Davis's new book as well.
Great, great. I'm not sure if Denny can hear us, so I'm going to type in the background. Lots of great reads. That is so awesome. And
there's so much that's out right now and coming out in the months ahead. That's really exciting. In historical fiction, in literary fiction, in fantasy, in romance, just lots of good books.
Okay, I'm going to, at this point, start to wrap up. So any last comments, Greer, that you would like to make?
Just thanks for having us. Thanks for reading The Arctic Fury. If you like stories of strong women in extraordinary circumstances, definitely check out my other books, because that's what I do. That's what I like to do. Although the next book that I have coming out is very different. It's going to be an epic fantasy series. And that starts in February. But that is also a story about strong women. It's just strong women in a matriarchal world instead of strong women in a patriarchal world. So it's a different kind of angle.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
I don't know if anyone can hear me, but thank you for having me.
Thank you both for being here. It has been a pleasure. And we have, I think, just flowed through the technology challenges very gracefully. And if you have not had a chance to read The Arctic Fury, do pick it up, borrow it from a friend, or borrow it from, or purchase it through Susie's list. She has a list on her website, Lux Low Country Travel, a dedicated page for the book club where you can buy books as well. And it has been my pleasure to host tonight. On behalf of Susie, we are sending well wishes. Everybody give her well wishes in the comments. And I think I can say good night to both of you, and maybe just do a couple little housekeeping things for the general book club. So thank you again so much. A pleasure being on screen with you tonight, and keep writing.
Thank you.
Hello, hello. So yes, you are in the right place. Susie L. McMahon Virtual Book Club and Melissa St. Clair on deck for Susie, who is a little under the weather tonight, and we are sending her our well wishes. Just wanted to say thank you again to Greer and Denny for being on screen with us tonight. The Arctic Fury, and then Denny's book will be in the queue for the spring. And just a couple of housekeeping items. Do stay tuned to the Susie L. McMahon Virtual Book Club Facebook for information about next month's meeting and any future announcements. If you had additional questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. But otherwise, I say thank you and good night.